Good morning, everyone. My name's Mary Beth Richards. I am special counsel to the chairman for FCC Reform, and I get the pleasure of a very brief introduction before we turn things over to Andrew Martin, who will be moderating the panel today. Thank you all very much for coming. This is our first of probably more than one workshop that we'll be holding around the planned consolidated licensing system. We appreciate all of your time for coming and helping us as we move forward with the system. I am particularly appreciative to those of you who are here for a second time because of our false start last month with the evacuation. The CLS system is really an ambitious project. It's part of our overall reform effort to make the agency more efficient and effective, easier to use our systems, and I wanted to thank in particular Pat Wren for her leadership, but also to the dozens of employees throughout the agency who have been working very hard on this ambitious project. The workshop will be followed by a notice of proposed rulemaking, and as I said earlier, also other workshops where we need to change the rules to conform terminology, to change the forms, the business practices, and also identify areas that are working well and don't need to be changed. So we need to hear from you. Starting today, we've had lots of good input on the CLS site that's on the Reform website, and I encourage you to continue to use that site as a means of communicating with us. We're monitoring that closely. And today, in closing, I just wanted to say, please be forthcoming, also creative, and we look forward to hearing your ideas and developing a dialogue as we kind of design, develop, and launch the new consolidated licensing system. So again, thank you, and Andrew, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mary Beth. A couple administrative items. Just the way the format's set up, we're going to try to go informal here and try to keep the discussion going. You'll notice that we have a 3-hour block of time. There will be breaks in there. You can see I'm drinking coffee and it'll require more than one break. What we're going to do is we're going to have people do their talks. So we were asked for 3 to 5 minutes each. As we go through, I will be getting questions from both the online community, which is being hosted behind us here, and from the audience. And the audience, please put your questions on a card and pass them to the individuals walking around. A young lady in the corner, Ms. Waters back there, and this tall guy over here. They'll pass the questions to me, and I'll try to line up the questions towards the speakers. What I'll probably do is, as we go through a couple of the presentations, we'll pause at that point, do some of the questions if they're available, so that we don't lose that in the process towards the end. So we'll keep this flowing, so I'd anticipate somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 speakers, maybe a little bit of a question period, and then we'll continue on with the process. You'll see I've got 2 cards here. I'll start fingering the yellow card around the 4-minute mark and probably the red card around the 5-minute mark. There are a lot of folks here, and there are a lot of things that he said, and this is just to help us keep pace. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bornson.
Thank you, Andrew. I used to be a soccer referee, so I'll try to avoid that red card. And hopefully I'll be able to use the microphone here. My name is Chris Bjornson. I'm with Steptoe & Johnson. I'm also the co-chair of the FCBA's Access to Government Committee, and participated, and our committee has coordinated with the FCC before in looking at electronic systems and looking at ways to improve that, and we're strong supporters of public forums like this where public input can be gathered. And so we first want to thank the FCC for hosting this forum and hope that everybody provides valuable input as the consolidated licensing system comes together. I'd like to make 4 general points, I guess, in terms of supporting electronic filing, supporting public input, supporting upgrades to electronic systems, and supporting consolidation integration. Not really controversial points, but nonetheless, I think it's important that those points get made. We support electronic filing. The more the better. It should be the rule, the rule with limited exceptions, rather than having exceptions sometimes swallow the rules. There are still license filings and other filings at the FCC that need to be incorporated electronically, that are made by paper. Those should go away as much as possible, and the Consolidated Licensing System should take all of them. As few, it should be the rule that all filings come into Washington instead of the lockbox in St. Louis, and when I say coming into Washington, coming through the electronic system. Electronic filing has a great many benefits. It's open, it's transparent, it's expeditious, it can be complete, it can be comprehensive, so that you only have to look from the FCC standpoint, look at an application once. You only have to look at the filing processes once if you're making the filing, and that when you look at the records, everything's before you. You don't have to worry about getting 6 or 7 amendments and knowing that they're all there, because that entire record is actually in the research. So from the public perspective, you can see the complete record. It can quickly answer questions, whether something's complete, what does a license do, etc. And it benefits every public stakeholder at the FCC. In terms of public input, this is a great forum, and it should be continued through the website, through interactions, whether formal or informal meetings. Public input should consistently be gathered so that as you develop the system, you can make continuous improvements. We support upgrades. ULS and IBFS are probably the most recent examples of filing systems that have gone through outstanding upgrades. Other filing systems haven't yet gotten to that level, and with the Consolidated Licensing System, I would hope that you would do as much to integrate the benefits of those systems and not lose anything from the systems that are working well, bring the other ones up to the level of excellence. I think it's important to note that upgrades can be costly, but nonetheless, ultimately they should be undertaken, because on the back end you have the public benefits and cost savings on the back end. And so we would encourage you to continue with that, even though it is a difficult process at times. And the benefits of upgrades can be seen by the recent ECFS 2.0, which I've praised numerous times and will continue to do so, because that was an outstanding upgrade at every level. Finally, we support consolidation integration. The same look and feel for systems would be great to maintain, or having the same look and feel across all systems would be something good for the public to create more convenience. Continuing convergence of communication systems and technologies and applications makes distinctions between systems less relevant, and so the consolidation that can occur would be a huge benefit. Just a disclaimer when I get to individual comments or answer questions, generally speaking, I'm speaking for myself and not the FCBA, but the FCBA does support this effort to upgrade the systems. Just some minor individual comments. As the system's designed, it should be a common entry point and then branch off into different modules as individual systems have their individual needs, but it should not lose any of the functionality of the current systems, but enhance them. Another comment that I would stress is that each draft form or each draft license should be accessible, or each license, the particular needs, should be available in draft form somewhere outside of the electronic system so that you can work on drafts offline. And that's all I have, and I think I've avoided any penalties cards. So.
Thank you. Mr. Garziglia?
Thank you. I'm John Garziglia from the law firm of Womble Carlisle, and for about 25 years now I've represented mostly broadcast stations in first paper filings and then in electronic filings through CDBS and the other various electronic systems that the FCC has. I have 7 points, and they're points of, I guess, improvement that I would like to see in the systems as the FCC considers what it's changing. The first one is public availability of all documents associated with a particular facility. Right now, there's a variety of petitions to deny, waiver requests, letter requests filed with the FCC that law firms and applicants, if they want to see what the document says, has to go over to the FCC and physically retrieve a paper copy of that document, or if it is available online somewhere, do a retrieval akin to a massive data search to try to find which link it might be available under. The proposal I'd like to make, and recognizing that simple proposals often aren't the right proposal, but something at least to discuss, is perhaps for each FCC facility out there with an FCC facility ID number to open in ECFS a docket for that facility, an ongoing docket, so that each piece of paper that's filed with respect to a particular facility with an FCC facility ID number, that piece of paper goes into ECFS underneath that FCC facility ID number to be available to anyone, because ECFS, as we all have used it and know, is a very, very good system for the retrieval of paper documents, and it makes it available immediately to the public. The second point I would raise is that I believe that with particularly engineers, the NAD and a NAD 27, NAD 83 conversion factor that's used for geographic coordinates simply drives people crazy and leads to massive confusion. In this day and age, the FCC should pick one, even if databases at their root level reflect one or the other, perhaps at least for the public display on the screen, applicants should be required to use one or the other, and then any conversion that might take place for the FCC take place behind the scenes. But we shouldn't be faced with FAA approvals in NAD 83 and then having the documents themselves, the license documents, in NAD 27. Third point, when the FCC makes a change in its database, no matter what the data is, whether it be something as simple as a licensee name, or something more substantial like change of coordinates or change of power of a broadcast station, there should be a data field behind it that shows the reason, date, and time for that data change. Too many times now it's difficult to find out why did something change, what application changed it, what was the reason for it. This assures data integrity as well as allows the public simply to track through and find out why changes are made in licensee records. Fourth point is to please beta test your new CLS extensively, and particularly don't rely on the old forms. The old forms were developed years ago, 1970s, 1960s, 1980s. Where necessary, I ask the FCC to take the time and do what, and I realize it takes OMB approval, but to take the time to get approval on forms that are appropriate for an electronic filing system. Do not try to force feed the old forms into an electronic data format. I think the example that we've all wrestled with recently is the ownership report form, the FCC Form 323, which was developed at a time when there was a limit of 7 AMs, 7 FMs, and 7 TVs, and the form was entirely suitable for that purpose. But in today's age, when there are multiple stations being owned by a licensee, multiple levels of ownership that we could not have imagined perhaps back in the 70s, the form is a little bit unwieldy for what the applicants are being asked to do. Number 5, there are a number of different engineering data entry points in applications, and the FCC engineers themselves, when they look at these applications, do calculations to see if these engineering entries are accurate. The public should have the same engineering programs that the engineers at the FCC use to arrive to figure out whether the data that's being submitted is accurate. If someone's going to be submitting height above average terrain, the public should have the same engineering program, the same background that the I have my own timer here. See it, and even before you wave the red thing, it said I'm probably getting toward the end. The same engineering programs that the FCC staff uses. It'll make it easier for the public. They know when they're submitting something to the FCC that the FCC engineers are likely to find it accurate. And then finally, I think something also that recent ownership report, FCC Form 323, data entry project. Try not to make the forms like, and not to, I tried to think of analogies, not like a shopping cart on Amazon, but more in the sense that data can be entered like you did for the Form 323 on a commercially available spreadsheet, so that those who are in the business of filing forms with the FCC can take something that is commercially available, whether it be a free product or a product that has to be purchased, preferably both. Preferably, it's publicly available products, but a publicly available spreadsheet product or a data entry product, and use that product as the front end, so that when information is entered in that form, it can then be uploaded to the FCC's site and be part of the application, rather than requiring this, as I try to analogize, like a shopping cart on Amazon, where you say, yes, click, I want to put that number in this box. Click, I put this number in that box, and moving through the form one by one like that, because that keeps one person wedded to that one form on one website, where in an efficient organization there might be multiple people that are entering data on a particular form at one time, it to be uploaded at a later time. Thank you.
Mr. Hagan?
Hi, my name is Brian Higgins. I'm a partner with the law firm of Wilkinson Barker Nauer. First, I want to thank the FCC for having this public forum. My experience with these systems over the years is that the FCC has done a very good job of reaching out to users and stakeholders to get their input and to make changes in the systems that reflect the issues and concerns that are raised at forums like these. I've been doing this long enough to remember, as John said, when things were all submitted in paper form, and when microfiche was the innovation of the day. And nobody wants to go back to that, I know. But all the systems that are online right now were designed probably about 8, 9, 10 years ago, and they have not been fundamentally redesigned since then. So they do reflect sort of their time and their age in the development of electronic systems. Lest we forget, ULS was originally designed to work with I forgot the name of it now, but the old browser that was state-of-the-art in those days. It was not designed to work with Internet Explorer. That's right. So things do change, and these systems need to change as well. As Chris mentioned earlier, one of the biggest objective here is to consolidate these licensing systems. Anybody who has used ULS or the experimental licensing system or any of the other licensing systems that the Commission uses knows that they're completely different. They don't look anything like each other, and they behave differently from how you get into the system, how you answer questions, how you upload attachments, how you do print previews, how you sign and certify, and then how you find them after they're on file. So all of us have become accustomed to the particular licensing systems that we use all the time. I like ULS, and it would be easier for me if everything looked like ULS. But I know that's not the case for everybody. So rather than making everything look like an existing system, I think the objective should be to make all the systems work together and look the same. So since we're all going to have to learn something new, it might as well be something new that's applicable across the various bureaus and the various systems. I just have 4 very high-level comments I want to make about about CLS. From my perspective, it needs to be intuitive. It needs to be efficient and flexible. It needs to be reliable, and it needs to be accurate. And just to briefly flesh some of those ideas out, in terms of intuitive, compared to the systems that, for all computer programs that were designed 10 years ago, anybody who has shopped at Amazon or purchased a PDA or has any kind of a new electronic device knows how much software has become really easy to use, easy to install, easy to start running, and easy to learn. And that's because a lot of thought has been put into how does somebody come to this system, what is the first thing they put in, what's the next question that they're going to have. And so what they've done is they've really reduced the process to the minimum amount of keystrokes necessary to accomplish a task. Minimum number of keystrokes, minimum number of screens. So it becomes very easy to use. It's not cluttered with all kinds of submenus and buttons that you have to click in order to get to things that you have to fill out to complete an application. In terms of it being efficient and flexible, the best example I can think of is the ability to pre-populate data in the forms. Right now, if in ULS, if you want to pre-populate, it only pre-populates from a previous version of that same form that you filed. If you're filing something in IBFS, it pre-populates data from the Commission's core system. The core system and FRNs are used by different people at the company for different purposes. And so you invariably pull in the wrong data into the form, and then you can't overwrite it without going back into cores. There needs to be more consistency back and forth between those two things so that you can pull in data, but then you can change it as well. In terms of it being reliable, by that it just simply means it needs to be a stable platform. It needs to be beta tested. There needs to be a shakedown of it. And I would like there to be more transparency when it's not working properly. I can understand not wanting to highlight the problems in a system that have been deployed to the public, but people here who use ULS every day are probably aware that, for the last couple of months, ULS has not been running at 100%, and you can't. I have tried and have not been able to find out why that is the case. And I don't, I just want to know there's a problem that's being worked on, and I would like to see that kind of an approach with the new CLS system. If there are problems, to state what they are and to give people a time frame in which they might be corrected. And finally, in terms of it being accurate, that's always going to be a problem because you get to so many records and it just becomes impossible. I guess the Heisenberg principle, it becomes impossible to correct for every variable that every way that something can be wrong. You just can't do it. But what you can do is give people the ability to sort of delete and zap dead records. Classic example would be FRN records. We have clients from around the country who have multiple offices and different departments and divisions doing different things, and somebody in a far-flung office will register a business radio license they need. And then, of course, when you need to assign it or transfer it, along with everything else the company holds, you can't find that person, they've retired, and you have to go through the process of having everything reset. So it would be helpful to be able to sort of blast away unused FRNs or sort of stray FRNs, and to give the people who are in charge of these data responsibilities at a company greater flexibility to sort of do a quality control management of the records that they have in the Commission's databases. But anyway, thanks again for the forum, and I look forward to hearing what other people have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Mark Brennan, and I'm pleased to be here today to participate in this roundtable discussion about the development of an agency-wide consolidated licensing system. At Hogan Levels, we represent a wide variety of commission licensees from all different services. And yes, I said Hogan Levels. On May 1st, DC-based Hogan & Hartson merged with London-based Levels to create Hogan Levels, which has approximately 2,500 attorneys and more than 40 offices across the globe. A consolidated approach holds the potential for many significant advantages over the current archipelago of online filing systems and databases, or, in the case of the Wireline Competition Bureau, the lack of an online filing system. Implemented successfully, a consolidated licensing system could be a key source of substantial amounts of critical data for current and future licensees, especially if it includes advanced, intensive data search capabilities. For example, CLS could include the ability to search all data fields, all data entry fields, including waivers and license conditions. And also, it could have the ability to search all machine-readable pleadings, filings, exhibits, waiver attachments, and any other documents that are submitted along with applications. It would also be helpful if CLS had the ability to deliver results in a variety of formats, including Excel spreadsheets, Adobe PDF, and zip files. In addition, by combining a number of existing databases from multiple bureaus and offices, the Commission could streamline certain filing processes and reduce or eliminate the need for redundant submissions, including with respect to administrative updates, certain transfer of control or assignment applications, and the like. This could, in turn, minimize the opportunity for filing errors, especially when combined with a number of enhanced application filing functions, notifications and reminders, data verification features, and real-time confirmations. For example, CLS could offer detailed instructions with all forms. It would be helpful to have as much of the information pre-filled into an application as possible. In that sense, you would use the most recent filings as the default for pre-filling the information. The ability to save a draft in progress or partial save would also be beneficial, as well as the ability to conduct test filings and receive error feedback from the system as to what the options should be for a user to correct their mistakes. Also, it would be helpful to allow third-party access to a draft application with the registrant or licensee's consent. And also, CLS could offer the ability to create user profiles such that after a licensee logs in, there could be a system of biographical data, basic licensee information that can be updated in real time, and that can be then displayed across all of that registrant or licensee's applications, authorizations, permits, licenses, etc. And also, it would be helpful to the users, and here we see this a lot with some of our clients, that after an application is completed, especially if an application extends to many types of needs, services, etc., that the system only show and print the questions and parts of the form that are needed. In other words, if there's a main form that extends to a lot of different services or a lot of different functions, and some of those questions, for example, are maybe redacted while the applicant is filling out the information in ULS, it would be helpful that when the application form is printed, that the form only shows the applicable questions and not page after page of unnecessary information for which all of the questions are left blank. After a filing is completed, things that can be done to help users and the Commission alike involve certain monitoring activities. RSS feeds or email updates regarding the status of an application to help users that are tracking the application. A centralized tracking center inside CLS where an applicant logs in, similar to what is available in ULS where you can see all of your pending applications. Outlook reminders, deadlines for petitions, and in any email updates, links to the publicly available version of the application. The efficiency gains from a consolidated licensing system could also reduce some of the administrative burdens on Commission staff. Thus, a consolidated approach could help accelerate application processing times in some instances. Furthermore, by taking steps to optimize the use of electronic filing and to minimize printing and paper copies, the Commission could help ensure that its licensing processes are as green as possible. Rather than continue to issue and mail paper copies of record to all Commission licensees, as it does in the wireless area, the Commission can save money, time, and the environment by either designating the electronic version of a Commission license as the official version or by simply posting a PDF version of the official license on its license database. To be sure, there will be many challenges to designing and deploying a consolidated licensing system. For example, creating new standardized forms with detailed instructions, and again I emphasize detailed instructions, harmonizing the instructions and terminology across services, integrating the old databases, ensuring adequate processing speed and server capacity, and providing sufficient data security, especially for confidential information now that it will be in a consolidated database, are all issues that will need to be addressed. Given the Commission's recent successes in launching ECFS version 2.0 and the Spectrum dashboard, however, I'm excited about the possibilities of a next-generation consolidated licensing system, and I look forward to discussing these issues and others today.
Thank you. Mr. Davis?
Good morning. I'm Joe Davis, and I'm a consulting engineer. I work primarily with Media Bureau applicants. CDBS is where I spend a lot of time. I saw the last half of a demo that some of the FCC staff put on while at NAB in Las Vegas, and that occurred subsequent to last month's meeting that didn't take place and today's meeting. And I'll tell you that session responded to a lot of the concerns and questions that I was going to raise last month, so I was very pleased to see that. I'm certainly interested to hear the approximate implementation schedule that may be being entertained, and also in what order the various bureaus may be transferred over to CLS. My work with CDBS is basically in three principal areas. Number one being application preparation and submission. Number two, public access and review of applications that have already been submitted. And the third area is probably one of the most important to consulting engineers such as myself, is the use of the downloadable data tables. And we use that information, we extract the raw numeric information for analysis so that we can properly protect existing stations from whatever it is that we may want to propose with our application. There are concerns that I have regarding cutover and beta testing. I'd encourage a lot of effort to go into that aspect. For anyone who worked with CDBS in the year 2000, I think would acknowledge that it was put online before it was quite ready for prime time. The data download was unstable well into 2000. Media Bureau staff worked very hard to resolve that, and much of the situation was beyond their control. But I certainly recommend a lot of overlap and at least 3 to 6 months of a period before opening CLS filing where the downloadable data is accessible from the new system so that we can adapt our procedures and be able to transition properly. We do have some concern with overcomplication resulting from one form, the use of one form. I appreciate the comments from the previous speakers and agree with much of what they've said, particularly with the questions that are irrelevant. So I won't repeat all of that. Regarding the three areas, number one, application submission, the demonstration was very good. It showed that depending on what is submitted and supplied in the application, you can get a fatal error or a warning error where you either can or can't proceed based on what the nature of the error was. And that speaks a lot to data validity, and that's been a real problem, particularly in the early days of CDBS. That is the boundaries of acceptable data. So I'd certainly recommend good emphasis towards continuing making sure that the data is valid. I'd encourage the use of drop-down responses or buttons instead of user-inputted data fields. For instance, for a community name, how do you spell St. Charles? Is that S-T period or is it S-A-I-N-T? And there's a number of other communities that can be spelled a number of ways. Channel numbers and class and things like that. If you input the wrong data, well, it's certainly garbage in and garbage out. And the FCC, when they process the application, may not know, are you really asking for that, or was this a mistake? We have to process the application based on what's said here. I'd also like to suggest that the hand-entered data by staff be minimized, and I believe that some of that still does take place today. For instance, rulemakings are still done in paper in a lot of instances, and staff makes typos too. It's, everybody does it. But if we can minimize the opportunity for hand-entered data, I think that would speak well. The demonstration in Las Vegas indicated that attachment types other than PDF in any computer format will be accepted. There is that raises some concern about proper formatting, and I think some further thought should go into that, into sticking with PDF, except for perhaps spreadsheets is necessary for certain numeric data. And for spreadsheets, please consider providing a downloadable template file that the applicant can download and then follow the guidelines in that template to properly prepare their spreadsheet. There was an antenna structure registration preload in the demonstration. That was good. Some sort of uniform precision of data is recommended, coordinates and meters to 1 decimal place. And make sure there's enough digits to consider heights over 1,000 meters. If I have to enter an elevation that's, for instance, 2,350 meters, I can't have a decimal place after that because we just run out of the number of decimal places. I agree with the conversion of 27 to NAD 83. Certainly some sort of batch conversion for the existing licensees can be done, making sure that there's flexibility in the process to avoid issues brought up that might create a short spacing where one doesn't exist now by simple conversion of legacy records. As we talk about a consolidated system, please consider the opportunity for multiple access log-ons for people working on different applications. If a single account is used and only one person can work on an application at a time, that's going to be a real bottleneck. We like CDBS. It allows us to skip sections. All I work on is the engineering part. There's other parts to the application that are irrelevant to me. That differs from ULS, where you have to kind of pretty much go in order before you can get to the subsequent sections. There's an environmental question about environmental processing that's typically included in the engineering aspect of Media Bureau forms. I'd encourage the Commission to consider moving that environmental question out of the engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer, I'm an electrical engineer, but I'm not qualified to make environmental assessments or certify that the environmental has done properly. I'd recommend that the environmental question be moved out of the engineering aspect. One idea is to require all antennas to be associated with an antenna structure registration, except for matters regarding RF exposure. In that fashion, the environmental certification can be done at the ASR stage to address local factors, and then the application can supply RF exposure. Regarding the second issue, for public access, with the cutover to the new system, we need to still be able to look back into everything that was filed under CDBS and have continued access to all applications, exhibits, and authorizations submitted or processed from CDBS. We need to have the ability to look at the history and continue to examine those official records. I'd encourage some sort of processing tracking system to be implemented. I think ULS has something like this. I don't spend a lot of time with ULS, but I think that you can go into ULS and find out exactly where your application stands. You know, has it been accepted? What's it waiting on? For instance, has it waiting on an FAA clearance and the ASR to be updated? Or is it waiting on an international clearance? Or, you know, where does it stand in the processing queue? I'll echo what some of the other speakers said regarding electronic access of all objections, petitions to deny, other pleadings. We need to have an easier way to examine those things once they're on file. And when we view an application, we need to be able to view it using the form version that was current when the application was filed. Currently, when we view an application, it's with the current form that has questions that didn't exist when that application was filed. And just a few comments regarding the downloadable data. Many times the downloadable data changes and the updates to the user community lags a little bit. Sometimes we get advance notice, but I'd encourage prompt updates regarding those code tables. And there's an archiving and current flag in the downloadable data. We need to improve the archiving of CPs that have expired or otherwise been superseded, dismissed applications, and expired STAs. I've got a number of other things, but I see that the yellow light is on, so perhaps we can come back to this a little bit later. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here with some information that, for those of you who are at NAB, you may have seen some stuff that we were roadshowing at that time. What the Commission has done today, and we've got a couple questions on the timeline associated with this, and it's going to lead into some questions I've received that anybody on the panel here can answer, but so we've heard about some of these topics. I'm trying to line them up to the speaker that spoke. So as far as the timeline is concerned, a fundamental component to getting a solid release schedule, one is looking for what systems people want to see transition first. So I've heard so far the ULS, if it ain't broke, don't fix it for the interim right now. I mean, there's improvements that can be made, but at the same time, we've got to start scheduling which system should go first. So we'd be looking for input along those lines of, is CDBS the first one to go? Is ELS or IBFS? Any recommendations along those lines would be helpful. We try to balance that with some of the ongoing issues. So if people want to address that, that would be helpful for us. One of the critical components of consolidating this is consolidating what we'll call the licensing processing at the Commission, the business flow behind that. And this is where we run into some regulatory trips, if you will, on terminology. And as simple as it may sound, an authorization may mean a license, may mean a construction permit. All of those hold, what I'll say, if you step up one level, functionally the same action, but because we have them in our rules and sometimes in statute, the terminology is very specific that this thing means you are authorized to go do something. The idea of consolidating licensing brings up the question of should we consolidate the terminology on some level. In some cases it might be too much of a lift, but we'd be looking for input along those lines. So the more we can get to a standard taxonomy across all the licensing activities, the more likely we'll be able to start representing an easier interface for folks to deal with. I will say historically we've targeted very specific, the industry has grown up that we've targeted the media folks with system catering to their specific needs and the wireless folks catering to their specific needs. The industry is no longer that specific, but a lot of that legacy terminology resides in the systems, and we need to get into that question and whether or not it makes sense to move forward with that, or is there a different approach? Maybe taking the terminology is not the correct approach and consolidating across the board, but making the references and the linkages. So, any comments on that? I'll throw that in a second. And the second question that I've seen here is, to the extent that the regulatory changes, the application terminology and whatnot, the control and quality of the data. So, at this point, there are lots of folks, and we use cores in the FRN setup, and I've seen some organizations with large numbers of FRNs, and I'm certain there are quite a few that can be removed. But there's a quality control aspect to that, and the Commission is very concerned about who has access to what components, and that's a rather involved process to say that you have access to one given application, and that person, whether you're a third party or the actual application owner, if you've gotten permission to do that. So there's a process, or there's a question surrounding how do we control access to these applications, and how does that engagement occur with the companies? Any thoughts along those lines would be helpful. So anyone want to field those? Anyone?
I guess I could start on the timelines. My practice has gone across wireless, satellite, and video programming, and so I've had access or interactions with all three of those systems, be it CDBS, COLS, IBFS, ULS, and then also some interaction with OET's licensing systems. And I think where you've seen upgrades occur, those are the systems that probably need to have an upgrade or need to get into consolidated licensing last. So I think wireless and IBFS don't necessarily need to go as quickly. They still need to be integrated at some point in time. But I would think, for instance, CDBS, COLS would be candidates to go first.
Go ahead.
I'll agree with Chris on that. I mean, a lot of the systems have been updated over time, and they're in pretty good shape. And the other thing to mention is some of these systems are more, we'll say, simpler, if you will. So, for example, experimental, there's much fewer applications that go in there. There's much fewer processing and sort of status checks that go into the experimental system. So maybe a system that's smaller like that is a good first candidate because it'll be less complex than, say, ULS, which has 40 or 50 radio services and different rules and requirements from the individual amateur all the way up to a plane to a wireless service provider that interact with the ULS. So I think experimental makes a lot of sense. Would love to see the equipment authorization database updated and modified too. I'm not sure if that's contemplated in this effort, but both of those systems are probably the most dated systems that the FCC has right now.
Very quick observation. In the broadcast field, we've got license renewals starting in 2011, which is going to require each broadcast station to file a license renewal application and associated filings. I would hate to see a changeover in CDBS take place midstream in that process with some applicants filing on an old form, some applicants filing in a new form. So that should be taken into consideration when considering the timing of changeover of CDBS.
Go ahead. I'm Peter Tannenwald from Fletcher, Hill, and Hildreth, and when I speak a little later, I'll have more to say about it, but I just disagree with a lot of what's being said here. I think that uniformity is overemphasized. The law is different in different areas. You need a construction permit to build a broadcast station. You don't need a construction permit to build a land mobile station, so you can't have the same terminology for everyone. And I also use all these systems. I mean, I've used them all the way since back Land Mobile was on Form 400 with 6 pieces of carbon paper. And I'm most comfortable with CDBS, which suggests either that maybe it's better than some people think they are, or people will prefer the system they work with the most and say that that's the best one. And my final comment is that I have made a living for several decades, and the spikes in my activity are when changes are made. The longer something stays the same, the more the licensees learn to work with it and understand it. So this is a bonanza for lawyers and everybody else, and it will take 5 years to settle down.
I think we'll continue on. Any other comments? We'll continue on with Mr. Dombrowski.
Thank you. I'm Tom Dombrowski. I'm an engineer, actually, at a law firm of Wiley Ryan here in town. Our firm represents almost every industry. We have media, we have wireless, we have satellite, we have most of the major equipment manufacturers we do work for. So day to day we have interactions with every system that the FCC has. I'm also co-chair of the wireless telecommunications group for the FCBA as well. I'm not really speaking on their behalf necessarily today, but I think that's also a reason I'm here today. And my background, while being at Wiley Ryan for quite a while, I was formerly at the Commission, and I had the privilege, if to use that word loosely, of working on the Universal Licensing System process back in the mid-'90s. And frankly, I'm happy to see that this is reinvigorated again. We tried in the mid-'90s. The reason why it's called the Universal Licensing System is the plan back then was to have everything in it. So I'm glad to see that effort's begun again. And just a few high-level points based on those experiences and experiences now being on the outside. I think from a sort of high-level perspective, it would be very nice to have this system, CLS system, be much more driven towards what's out there on the software side now. So APIs, application programming interface, that's what everybody's used to in the web world right now. Whether you can do that for the data input part, it's not clear to me given the rules and requirements, but to the extent a sophisticated user or user groups could get that API and be able to actually create the front-end interface for their particular needs, I think that would go a long way. Now, certainly you should be able to do that for the querying of the database perspective. So you guys can put out the general query of the database, but we should, on the outside, those that are sophisticated enough, be able to manipulate that and describe queries, script queries, do what we need to do to get the data out of the system, just like you do, for example, with Google Earth. That's a great example of something that would be nice to see on the FCC side. On the electronic filing piece, I'm a strong proponent of electronic filing. I think the more we can move towards electronic filing, the better. Again, flexibility would be very important. It would be nice to be able to more be driven by the requirements rather than the front end, if that makes any sense. So the idea of you guys tell us what you need and how it should be provided, and to the extent we can go more towards, I won't call it a batch file because that's not really the right answer, but to the extent there are huge filings like ownership filings, the ability for us to upload a file based on whatever parameters you say we need to meet. So flexibility is sort of the key thing from my perspective on that. And then consistency. I guess I'll disagree with Peter on this. I mean, the more we can drive consistency, the better. You look at our firm, we have pockets of people that work on IBFS, pockets of people that work on ULS, pockets of people that work on experimental. And because these different interactions with the licensing systems are so different, you have different expertise. If you had a more consolidated approach and similar procedures and processes, you just have one pool of people that could do whatever you needed to do on whatever time. And you know, so the practical implication of that is if we have that one person that knows how to use experimental licensing system and they're on vacation, you have someone that has to start over again and learning how to actually interact with the FCC. So from my perspective, the more consistency you can drive on the process and procedures, and a lot of it is not statute driven. A lot of it is we've always done it that way here at the FCC, and no one really knows why. So to the extent you can kick down those doors and move forward on that, it's going to help the interactions with the system. And then my last comment, and I'm trying to keep this short, is, and I certainly have other more specific comments as we get into question and answers, real-time monitoring. The ability for folks to opt in to get information from the system. So if that application status changes, I think someone else mentioned that, you could get an email. Or even if we're going mobile, if you really want to get a mobile email of some type or some sort of mobile interaction, being able to real-time monitor what's going on with either your application, your waiver, your information that's being treated and touched by the FCC. And again, I think that has to be an opt-in because I'm certain not everybody wants that kind of real-time monitoring. But for some folks, I think that would be a very beneficial thing. And especially if you can opt in on a particular application, if there's something that's very crucial and critical to you, you may want that minute by minute, second by second. That will free up resources for the FCC, never mind the outside resources of constantly calling people or trying to monitor the system. So some way to automate that process would be extremely useful. And then the final comment, I think I already said final once, but I'm going to add one more just based on what you said there. In terms of the front-end data entry piece, there needs to be some flexibility there as well, because with really large corporations, one point of entry, one point of sort of FRN, CORS interaction doesn't work. Different parts of the company are going to have different things they need to do, but more importantly, and something that maybe people don't really understand, some companies have some security issues. They do stuff for the federal government, and only a certain person can actually manipulate or enter information that is provided to the FCC. So just to keep that in mind, that there does need to be some flexibility on that front end. The more you can drive to consistency there is great, but there does need to be some capability of it not being, if you're a very large company, you only have one point of entry and one person and one password to get into systems. So I'll yield at that point.
Mr. Langham?
I'm Troy Langham. I'm with Clear Channel Communications, and it's certainly a privilege to be here, and I thank Lisa and Jim for inviting me up. As the seventh speaker on this panel, it's very difficult for me to find anything unique to say. And I think that's good. There's not been a lot of people staking out flags for things must remain the way they are because they are. I understand what Peter is saying and about the familiarity of a product or change and acknowledging that there are some statutory things that we're going to have to address in this. But to kind of camp onto what Tom has said, I think APIs are the solution to a lot of the heritage issues that we may come about. And also, another point that Tom has brought up, for us and our corporation, process control is going to be very important. Who has access, why they have access, and how many people can have access is going to be very important. And control of process is going to be extremely important as we move forward. As a company that owns more than a few broadcast properties, we have had to learn how to deal with things in a non-paper format. And one of the most scary things for us is change. And not change in this type of process, but a minor administrative update that causes a paper dump by the printing people here that arrives in boxes at our place that some poor person is tasked with a month or two of scanning and inputting back into the system. That is an incredible administrative headache that I hope we can make go away throughout this process. Data integrity and the archiving of old records. That needs to be careful attention needs to be paid to those aspects as we go forward, so that things don't happen like last week when one of our broadcast stations disappeared from the face of the earth in the electronic system. We happened to notice it and asked that it be brought back. Could have been an embarrassing situation. I think we can get past these relatively minor issues, as long as we look toward transparency, accuracy, and if it's paper, look at moving it to electronic. Now, let's see, a couple other things just to hit some points that either I want to emphasize, because my prepared notes are out of here. One of my hot buttons is ASR prefill, since our lives have become so married to the antenna structure registration. as a part of any pull down or any pre-fill. Integration coming off the ASR perhaps is the way to go. On that same topic, ASR changes back to the facilities associated with that tower. The tower owner gets a new survey. Tower is now across the street from where it was, at least on paper. We need to know about that. We need to bring the various bureaus up to date and bring our records up to date. And I'm just going to read as my closing comments, I really think APIs are the answer. Openness of the system. If someone is very familiar with working with the CDBS format, we can design an API that looks and feels and touches kind of like CDBS. If you're accustomed to working with something that doesn't look like anything that the ULS system looks like, yet your data still ends up there, like we do around our office often, I think that that's the way we should go. And I have more specific comments as we drill down into this.
Mr. Norby?
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me here. My name is Peter Nordby. I'm representing APCO today. APCO is extremely pleased and excited about this change. There have been a number of problems over the years with ULS that we have gone in and had to work through, and much of that is solved now, but we look forward to this change to resolve some of those things permanently. A number of items have been brought up, so user friendliness is definitely an issue. The 601 form, which APCO services mostly on Land Mobile, is sometimes very difficult for people. So we'd like to see that improved. The continued support for electronic filing is an expansion of that would be excellent. The providing for complete historical data. Very often we have to go back and look through and what happened, how did this get granted, what rule was used, anything like that we can drill back in through time is most helpful. If those could be downloaded, that would be appreciated as well. The combined and the continued and expanded improvements that ULS has brought with timeliness of licensing, we'd like to see that be continued with CLS. Currently, ULS processes applications, I think, about every hour. If we could go a little bit quicker than that, that just greatly helps us when we're working on applications to know right away that it's fixed, it's done, we can move on, we can forget that application, we've got a file number. ULS has also brought, and this is an area for continued expansion, greater support and focus on the data. That should definitely be continued in CLS. Some of the other systems, CDBS, we tend to have a little more trouble where when there's a problem, it feels that it goes off to an area where we don't know what's happening, and it causes a lot of extra effort. So that continued improvement would be excellent. All public documents being available, anything using all the supporting document, potentially PCNs, petitions, all of those types of documents, make those available, attach them right into either the application or the license, preferably both, would be great. Testing, I entered this field when ULS was just emerging. ULS is very complicated. That's primarily the system we operate under. I understand that, but more testing would be great so that we don't have to experience some of the inconsistencies that have happened in the past. And then as a prior person had brought up openness, when we do submit problems, it would be also great to know what the status of that problem is and what the resolution is. Many times we work on the problem and we're not quite sure whether we did something and you fixed it for us, or was there something wrong on your side? And as our systems are automated, this helps us know that we're not going insane, that the problem. We're also very, very interested to know which systems are converted, when they'll be converted. Those obviously are going to be a moving target, but at least any thought that you have to when those systems come online would be greatly appreciated. And then the data for download. Other people have said this. The data for download is absolutely invaluable. It allows us to customize and develop internal solutions to solve our business problems. So anything possible that can be downloaded would be appreciative.
Hi, I'm Allison Ellis. I'm Director of Regulatory Policy for Ericsson, and I also handle experimental licensing for Ericsson. And so I'm going to focus my comments today on really the experimental licensing portion. I first want to say thank you for inviting me here today, and also thank you to the OET staff, whom I've always found to be very knowledgeable and responsive when I've had experimental licensing issues. As a non-engineer, I sometimes find that system to be not very intuitive or user-friendly, and so my comments today are really more specific. They may be a bit in the weeds for this forum, but having just filed some applications, they were sort of fresh in my mind as improvements that would not only make it easier to complete the application, but also probably easier to process the application. Under the category of improving user-friendliness, I really like the feature that allows you to use a previous application for a template for a new application, but sometimes you only need to make one small change in one of the fields, and so it would be really great if you could see the entire application and view it and edit it, the full application, rather than having the pages sort of in sequence, having to move from one page to the before you can move on to the next page. Sort of delinking them, I think, would be very helpful. Also, if you only are changing one field, being able on each page or at any moment in the application process to be able to submit it right then, rather than go through all of the sort of having to pre-populate, for example, the emissions or some other field. Making the information more accessible. Having filed a lot of these applications, it would be great if there were a way to track all the applications filed under a single FRN number and sort of get a list of everything that's been filed. Or to have a confirmation number lookup feature. I have in the past written down the wrong confirmation number or forgotten to write it down, and that requires either an email to the FCC or a call to the FCC to have somebody in the experimental licensing branch look it up for me. And if there were a feature to look it up myself, I think that would save some processing time. Other people have mentioned it would be great to have an automatic email notification of when something has been granted. I occasionally get email notifications if there's a particular issue that needs to be addressed, they need additional information, or more recently if a license is about to expire and there's an opportunity to renew it. But the grant always comes in the mail, and it always comes in the mail a week after the demonstration has already taken place. So it's definitely something that I have to be very proactive, keeping on my calendar and checking on it. Also, one small thing is that the confirmation page right now only lists the confirmation number and the application number. It would be really great if it also included the location of the demonstration and the dates, because oftentimes I'll get a call that says, hey, is that Texas location been granted yet? And then I have to sort of go back through all my records and think of it, and it would be really great if just that confirmation page had all that information. Another thing in the category of adapting the tools to minimize errors is it would be oftentimes when Ericsson wants to demonstrate a product, we will do it in 15 locations over a 4-month period of time. So it would be really great if the system could handle road shows where you could put in each individual location with the specific dates of that location, but all of the other specifications are the same, so that you don't have to either well, you don't have to file multiple applications for basically the same demonstration. Or sometimes if you want to do it for the 6-month period of time, that gets a little bit confusing, I think, on the back end from the OET folks. Another just small feature to minimize errors would be if there's a built-in address or built-in address coordinate cross-check. Because sometimes in Google Earth, if you don't have the cursor in quite the right spot, then you can enter the wrong coordinates, and then it takes a week or so, or even longer, for OET staff to get back to you and say, "Did you really mean that? Are those the right coordinates?" And it just seems like an easy feature that could be built in. One last thing is, I think a previous presenter said that having a feature where you could save drafts. I think that's great. Because sometimes you want to be able to sort of pre-fill something in without actually submitting it, and then giving it, at least me, because I'm not an engineer, and then giving it to someone in our engineering staff to double check that these are the parameters that they want to operate on. But you can't really do that very easily, and so that would be a very good feature to incorporate also. And those are my comments.
Thank you. A couple questions have come in, and again, for everybody. We've heard a lot about legacy access, and understand that the historical records need to be accessed. But there's a couple different ways you can go about doing that. It's keeping the full-blown application up and being able to access it as if you were in the CDBS, IBFS, or whatever the case may be at that point in time. Or there's more of a warehouse approach where the data is still there, but the queries are a little more loose form, and it's not going to give you the exact experience that you have today. Are there opinions along what makes sense or what doesn't make sense along those lines?
I think that you want to be able to reconstruct the application as close as possible to what it looked like at the time. There are a number of reasons for that. One of them, from a lawyer's point of view, is sometimes we're looking to see if a licensee misrepresented something, and if you don't see the way they said it, you can't make that determination. Another thing, though, that's a problem with the searches now, for example in CDBS, is that if you try to recreate a license from 10 years ago, it will populate the licensee name with today's licensee. And that becomes a real problem, and there's a workaround. You can look at what the public notice was in that field and see the old and the new party. But it's, at least for assignments. But in general, if you want to see something historical, you usually want to know more than just what the coordinates and power were at that time.
Peter, do you have something?
Yeah, I would reiterate that same thing. We want to see what is historically done, as well as if that data could be put in a download format, then it can be integrated into other systems for searching. So, and that could be done through a splitting of the database between here's an archive and here's sort of the active system.
Okay. Joe?
I would appreciate if the search features were not slimmed down for historical research. The search features are very valuable exactly for that purpose now.
I like what Peter Tannenwald said about the availability of the actual application and the actual documents that are granted as a result of the application. In the broadcast field in particular, construction permits and licenses are now electronically generated, but sent out by mail with a signature on them to the applicant. And there is no repository for that, at least that I'm aware of, that's easily accessible for that actual mailed copy with someone's signature on it showing the license as it was actually granted, which goes back to this keeping of all documents in some electronically available file. ECFS, for instance, would be a great repository for every CP and license that was granted in the broadcast field, just a copy as signed that went out in the mail to the applicant, and it's there forever, and we don't have to worry about it. Henceforth, it's there to be retrieved if an issue ever arises.
It actually goes further than that. If an FCC inspector shows up, they want that piece of paper with a signature on it. They don't want the computer-generated one. And if you go to the Media Bureau and say, I need a new one because I lost it, there's no procedure for that, and a lot of times they say, we we can't do that for you. So then you trek over to the public reference room and you start go through old crusty files and find a dried piece of paper that has the signature and you take a picture of it. But that all goes to your question that you raised earlier about having some kind of a way to generate a document that is the real license, and then there's an authentication question which has to be addressed. But if that can be solved, that's clearly the way to do it, so you can get another one if you lose the first one.
I think that goes to training, too. I mean, the field guys have to be trained to understand that the electronic file is now the actual file. But more to the point, and it's not clear to me the best way to sort of have the historic archived information, but one thing that would be very useful is an ability to, maybe even on a single screen or two screens if it's a very complicated license, being able to track the entire history of the application and license through. Because right now it is a nightmare for a lot of these systems if there's partitioning or disaggregation or if there's leases or things like that. Just having a screen that's sort of historically, you can unwind it back to where it started and then see where the changes were, and then you know which parties you need to talk to or which parties were responsible for some of the changes. That's one of the big lacking things in all the systems right now. So that piece of information, that would also help with any of the field issues as well, because then you can just say, here's what the electronic record was as of that day, and that's what you guys should be looking at.
Assuming we fix the required documentation, but the formal authorization, the final documentation, if we just made it all electronic and stopped mailing, because I've heard this desire to go green a little bit, is that going to create a problem? Do people want these pieces of paper? I mean, we can just say authorized. Do you want to have a push-pull approach? Either we push the information. I know there seems to be some desire to have some customization where you get to kind of pick and choose what you get notifications on, or do you just want to say maybe you get an email that says authorized, but the formal authorization is at this link? I mean, are there thoughts on that?
In terms of the push, I would push as little as you could. I mean, I think the email. Some people are going to get 5,000 administrative updates overnight. They don't want to get 5,000 licenses in an email. They would like to get an email that says you had 5,000 administrative updates. If you want to see the additional information, click here and go look at those 5,000 administrative updates. So I think it should be flexible in terms of, as I expressed before, let the party figure out how they want to interact with it. But, because some folks are going to want a lot more hand-holding, some are going to want none, and some are going to want somewhere in the middle. So the flexibility built into the system to allow people to sort of pick and choose what they want to do, I think, is the key thing.
The key is that the application that was filed or the permit or license that was issued is actually the one you're looking at 10 years later. So as long as the electronic file system that is created is a PDF of that actual document, and it lasts forever and it can't be changed, that's great. And I think Peter raises the point with the construction permits and licenses. Right now, they're electronically generated, so over time, what was granted back in 1987 or 1999 by the system looks different today than was granted back in those years. And that is not good from a perspective of trying to see what the agency did back on a particular date.
So that speaks to capturing the actual artifact at that point in time as opposed to reconstructing the artifact.
Correct. Right now it's done on a data, I believe it places data into a form, and this, Joe made this point, where you call up an application form in Broadcast now, and you come up with a new application form, yet the applicant's old answers, and there are questions on the form which the applicant never answered because it's the new form that's coming up with the applicant's old answers on it. What we should be able to see is the application as filed by the applicant back on that actual data filing, and the construction permit or license as actually granted by the Bureau on the date that it was granted, not as it might be constructed, throwing in various bits of data from different systems at a future time, because that leads to questions, issues, problems.
Yeah. Good, Mark.
Adding to that, I think what's most important in that context is that the data be accurate, that you maintain the data integrity. I don't think the format is necessarily key, whether you're using an old format style. The important thing is that the data is accurate as of the time that it's intended to reflect, and that you don't lose anything in the conversion. But the actual format there may not be as important as keeping the data integrity secure.
The one other question that's come from the floor, some of you have seen the Spectrum dashboard, and so that there's a more broad strategic question about the Consolidated Licensing System. Should it stay focused purely on consolidated licensing, or should we start looking at other avenues? So if you look at the Spectrum dashboard, that can loosely be interpreted as more of a spectrum management approach towards representing the information. Is there a desire to see the system go into those locations, or keep it focused on licensing and that alone? I mean, I've heard some ideas about cross connections against DCFS and referencing other items that are currently offline or running through a separate process. But from a scoping standpoint, should CLS just be licensing, or should we go somewhere else with it? Anybody?
I think, at least for the beginning of this, I think what Tom was suggesting in terms of APIs could solve a lot of that problem. If there are folks on the outside who want to take a Spectrum dashboard approach to looking at the ULS data, for those of us that are savvy enough to be able to program, then you can come up with a system to do that. I think by the same token, being able to, and someone else has mentioned this as well, download tables, either Excel spreadsheets or other database files, in order to manipulate the data in the way you want to, will solve a lot of those questions, at least in terms of getting access to the licensing information for the public and for manipulation of it.
Mark, you want to say something?
Yeah, I think there is value in trying to integrate the dashboard or some of the dashboard capabilities into CLS. I don't think there's any value in just having the same entry point or portal point. I think the key is to make sure that some of the data can be combined. You can do more advanced searches, and that's where the key would be. So if there is any attempt to link the two, I think the key is to make sure that you can cross-reference data and get a more powerful search function out of it.
So I think we'll take a 10-minute break here, and we'll start up. We'll start up at 11:30 with the next half. Thank you. Mr. Gibson, and if I recall correctly, you have some slide. Okay.
I wasn't going to be the only one. Okay.
Gee, thanks. Glad we talked.
Well, good morning. My name is Mark Gibson. It's always dubious being the one to speak after a break, but please come back. I think I have something to say. Thank you, first of all, for inviting ComSearch to speak here. It's exciting to be part of the change in the licensing system. I kind of agree with many of the previous speakers, especially the gentleman that said it's kind of hard to go late in the deck because several people have probably already taken your thunder. So what I'm going to do is try to be general, but we'll get in the weeds a little bit as it relates to some of the work that we do. One point that we'd like to make is that we do thousands of filings of microwave applications a month. And in fact, probably last year we did on the order of 16 to 17,000 microwave applications. So when we hear the FCC say things like changing licensing systems, we get a little concerned. We like the approach that the Commission is taking here, and we think having an open discussion coupled with an NPRM is excellent, and we are certainly happy to get into a lot more details, as we go forward. So like I said, I'm going to kind of keep my comments into the weeds related to what we deal with, which is the microwave stuff. But one thing I wanted to say up front was that we think this is a juncture at some point during this entire process. Across the board with most of the Commission's databases, but certainly with the ones we deal with, is to go in and fix the data errors that are there through several means, one of which could be to invite the licensees to have some amnesty period for making changes that are corrections to their data. Much like you did with the BRS back in the days of the AWS Relo. I think that was probably 5 or 6 years ago. There was an amnesty period of about a year where BRS licensees were invited to come in and make changes to their data because that data was what was going to be used to determine the cost relocation. So to the extent that the data are very important, and of course we all believe that the data are important, it would be a really good opportunity to make the changes to the Commission's databases then. Changes to the data then. We reiterate and resonate with what many folks said about data checking. There's lots of facilities and ways to do that, drop-down boxes and whatnot. Lots of people fat finger coordinates, for example. So we have in our software the way to determine at least whether or not coordinates are in the United States, if not in water. So, the Commission could certainly do that. And one thing that we ran into in the early stages of the ULS was truncation. And so I'll say this for the purpose of just being specific. I'm sure this will probably resonate with people. Don't truncate, because round instead. And I'm doing that because our software people asked me to say that. We've heard lots of people say FRNs. We run into the same problems. We use owner codes in our databases, and we have there's several carriers that through acquisition and consolidation have scores of owner codes. So we understand it's a problem. It's not intractable, but to the extent that we can coalesce under single FRNs and license information for the cores information, we certainly applaud that and would be happy to help with that. Like I said, we deal primarily with microwave licensing, although we do touch just about every aspect of the CLS. One of the things that we see was an artifact of that microwave licensing is probably different, indeed different than most other site-based licenses. When you file a microwave license, you're actually filing two licenses. You have a call sign for both ends of the path, assuming both call signs, both paths transmit. So with the microwave application, there is the call sign, and then there's the path associated with that, which is represented by call signs. Well, a lot of times what we see happen is that the receive site that's call sign represented associated with the transmit site has data that can be different from that specific call sign that might be its own transmit site. So coordinates can be different, specific information can be different, even frequencies can be different. So we like to see a better, tighter coupling between the license data for the license information and receive site information. We also would like to see a little tighter coupling with the ARS database. There's lots of times where we see changes made in the ARS that don't get put in the ULS and vice versa. We use obviously the ARS for lots of things just in terms of background and verification. So anything that can be done to ensure the connection between the IRS and ULS certainly would be applauded. We don't deal with the front end of the ULS certainly for microwave. As most people are aware, there's a back end, and we do batch processing, and we've written scores of software programs to do the batch processing with microwave. And so that's very good and helpful, and we work closely with the Commission to bring that about. But there are still bugs in that. We run into situations where we'll do a batch upload, and we usually do those at night, and there will be some sort of an exception or a problem, and then the whole thing gets kicked back. So we need to work better on how to do that and how to smooth that out and how to make the connections a little bit better. And I've got some specific examples here we can talk about perhaps at the break. The other thing we'd like to ask is a higher priority be put on applications that are not subject to conditional authorization. We believe that what happens is microwave applications are dealt with in the order they're filed, and several situations can arise where a microwave application would have some conditions associated with it, and it would stand in the way of applications that would be behind it that could be approved. So if there would be a way through the triage process, whether it's a person interacting with it or whether the machines interact with it, to kick any application that can't be approved right away into sort of a holding bin, that would allow all the applications that could be approved on maybe a fast track to get through the system a little more quickly. And finally, well, actually not finally, the experimental. I resonate with what Allison said about experimentals. We do a lot of work with experimentals. For example, we do the frequency coordination for trade shows like CTA and whatnot. And so we're working with the guys at OET and the experimentals a lot, and we really appreciate the work they do. By the same token, we do frequency coordination for the wireless medical telemetry area, and we monitor the experimentals to ensure that there are no experimentals authorized that would be using specifically the 608 to 614 as well as the 1.4 gig. So there's situations where the authorizations are not consistent with respect to the conditions that are put on the licenses. So I know that's a bit of a nuance and perhaps deeply in the weeds, but as you are looking at this, it would be really helpful if there could be some consistency there. We see things that say, you are not allowed to use this portion of the spectrum. Then we see things that say this bit has to be notched out. So when we talk about nomenclature and taxonomy, it would be really interesting to know what notched out means. Because there are some out-of-band emission limitations for other systems that operate on the adjacent channels for WMTS, and they have some tighter considerations. Finally, as I said, I kind of resonated with some of the things Tom said about APIs. And Peter said about not changing. So what we'd like to make sure that as this is rolled out and as development occurs, that there's a very tight coupling with the users of this, the high-end users or the hardcore users like us and like SiteSafe and several others. We'd like to have a good defined turnaround time for working on changes. As I said, we've written lots of software routines that interact with the ULS and the databases, so we're going to have to go in and modify our software accordingly, and we'd like to do that in coordination and consistency with the Commission. We'd like SLAs, but I know that's probably asking for too much in terms of turnaround and interaction with it. We can talk about that. We might put that in our comments, but I throw it out there since this is a green light discussion. And finally, like I said, we are happy to coordinate with the Commission on the testing and support of that. Your success obviously is our success, and we would really like a tighter coupling there. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Ms. Vetasinke?
I'm probably going to take this in a direction that it has not gone in at all yet. My name is Katie Ventasigui. I'm an employee at the FAA's Air Traffic Organization, and for the last 10 years I've been doing obstruction evaluations. The FAA and the FCC have a common concern when it comes to construction of antenna towers in the navigable airspace, and because of that common interest and our overall end goal of safety and public interest, we have come together on certain regulatory aspects of the filing requirements. And it's because it's those areas where we come together and we basically say the same thing but provide different tools for you to determine what we're saying is what I'd like to just speak to a little bit today. As many of you may be aware, there is 14 CFR Part 77 notice requirements. For the FAA, it's based on a number of factors of when you need to file with the FAA for an aeronautical determination, which would identify potential effects to air navigation, make recommendations for lighting, which is enforced by your FCC registration, and also to help prevent potential hazards that may cause effect to aviation. The FCC has their own set of regulations under 47 CFR Part 17. If you were to look at the two documents together, you'd see almost always the language in both of these documents is the same. And the FAA provides a tool called the Notice Criteria Tool to assist the public in identifying when they need to file with us. Additionally, the FCC provides a tool called TOW-AIR. Both of those tools will provide results letting you know when you need to file with either agency. It'll also tell you why you need to file with us, or it will tell you if you don't need to file. Both are working. We have an electronic filing system. You have an electronic filing system which is being advanced right now, and what we'd like to do is we'd like to further consolidate the initial steps for when you need to file with the FAA. There's a couple of concerns that we have with the TOW-AIR tool because they're basically using federal aviation requirements for identifying when you need to file. What we'd like to see happen is for the TOW-AIR tool, which in its results will tell you it's not definitive until you've done your due diligence of checking with the FAA, that rather than having the TOW-AIR tool on the FCC website as a separate tool for determining notice criteria when it's based on the same calculations, is that you point to the FAA site. Therefore, we can be responsible for any mistakes that are found, any data issues that there are, because we have the immediate FAA up-to-date database, whereas the FCC is using source data that's updated on a 56-day cycle. So my input here would be that the TOW-AIR site be pointed to the FAA's notice criteria tool, which would streamline the process for the end user in determining when they need to file with both agencies and then trying to marry up our programs to make it an easier process for the public user in getting both regulatory requirements satisfied in a single filing.
I'm going to have a tough one with his name. Ms. Durchak?
Very good. Thank you. My name is Connie Durchak. I'm with PCIA, the Wireless Infrastructure Association. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much. This is a huge undertaking, and we really appreciate the Commission's efforts to engage the users and help you frame up some requirements as you engage in this undertaking. So thank you very much. PCIA primarily represents licensees, infrastructure providers, tower and equipment manufacturers, services firms that represent the wireless infrastructure industry. We also have some services from legacy iterations of PCIA that perform services such as frequency coordination for private land mobile, as well as AWS clearinghouse for spectrum relocation, cost-sharing matters. So we primarily, our staff, our members, our customers primarily use the ASR and ULS databases, and so that's where I'll center my comments today. We do support electronic filing. We do support anything that is going to bring us into a contemporary IT web environment experience, mirror best practices in that area. One caution, though, is that 15 to 25% of PCIA's private land mobile frequency applicants don't have access to the internet, to computers even, or if they do have access, they don't use them. So while the inbound information is fine, because we'll take their paper versions and we'll translate it into an electronic format, noticing out to them, there has to be some sort of provision where they can continue to receive paper notifications if they would like to, because they don't have access to an electronic format. And that might take a generation or two to overcome. Also, because it's a business where there are third-party participants in the process, including PCIA, but also license preparation firms, any noticing to the licensees, it would be very helpful if the Frequency Advisory Committee were also included on those notices back. So we would appreciate that. Just some general observations as well. Really applaud the idea of the CLS manager that staff had mentioned earlier. Would encourage you to maximize the use of embedded performance support systems, EPSS tools, to help with that intuitiveness, to make the data as simple and error-free as possible to help users interact and navigate the database more efficiently and effectively. That includes things like pre-filling, auto-populating fields, previewing an application before filling it out, allowing third-party access to draft applications, as Ms. Ellis had mentioned, not requiring the form to be completed sequentially, allowing you to navigate around in the application, and then override certain fields if there's a good reason, provided there's some waiver or some explanation for the need to override the field, would be very helpful. I'm trying to jump through here because a lot of the ground that we had talked about has been covered. We too file large volumes of applications, and we do that through a batch filing process, as Mr. Gibson had talked about. And so we would like to work very closely with the Commission to preserve that sort of large volume filing capability electronically, whatever that's going to look like. Mary Beth had talked about, and you had talked about harmonizing terminology. That's fine, but please let's make sure we have a glossary so we all understand what the terms mean. I particularly want to know what unconsummate means. Historical data, please preserve it and migrate it. Data conversion, datum 83, fine, but let's try to get on the same page with those. Staff has asked me to specifically call out if we can have some sort of mapping capability that would overlay the data in ULS, for example. And there's an example of it in the Spectrum dashboard. We would like to see that application applied here, but use the boundary maps that the FCC uses in licensing, so MTAs and BTAs, as opposed to strict political boundaries, municipalities, areas of operation, that sort of thing. Moving a little bit to migration and implementation and rollout, would really appreciate it if the Commission would consider establishing user groups for gathering specific requirements and for each of the legacy databases that are being migrated over. And then, of course, beta testing. And one can never over-communicate. So a comprehensive communication strategy to the licensees and applicants and to all of the third-party entities that are involved in the process would be much appreciated. Specifically moving to ASR, please allow us to provide Form 854R electronically. The form is currently a paper copy form that the FCC mails to the tower owner. The tower owner then provides paper copies to tenants, licensees, permittees. We did file a petition for rulemaking. That item has come up, which we appreciate, and we would like for the FCC to consider that request specifically. Also, include a threshold question to minimize duplicity. Currently, there are several duplicate records in the system. At one time, each licensee filed for registration when Part 17 rules were revised in 1995. That placed the filing burden on tower owners, which eliminated most but not all of the duplication. So including a threshold question to determine if the applicant is the structure owner would help further minimize additional duplication going forward. Let's see. Enable improperly registered towers to be deleted from ASR. And I can, I see I have the yellow card, so I can talk more specifically as we go into Q&A or file specific recommendations in the NPRM. But thank you.
Ms. Brayboy.
Good morning. My name is Linda Brayboy. I'm with the firm of Bennett & Bennett. We represent a lot of small rural wireless carriers. We also serve as general counsel to the Rural Telecommunications Group. We applaud the FCC's efforts in trying to increase accessibility to data, which is very important to us. We have to monitor our competitors, and in that vein, we would definitely like to see legacy databases moved into a new CLS system. We would like to make sure that the data is reliable, and as Mr. Gibson mentioned, maybe having some type of amnesty period to make sure that the data is consistent and reliable would be important. That's about it. I agree with a lot of the other comments that have already been discussed, and the one thing I would like to see is maybe a when you're going in to do your initial licensing, having like the red light system available right there so that you can check your status with the commission before you go all the way through your application process and then find out that you have a problem, a debt problem. So that's one concern of ours. Thank you.
Mr. Imlay.
Thanks. I'm Chris Imlay. I'm the senior principal of the communications law firm of Booth, Ferret, Imlay, and Tepper in the Washington area. But I'm here today in my capacity as general counsel for ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio. And as is often the case when talking about amateur radio regulatory topics, I'm all by myself. But there are a couple of issues. I toil in the same vineyards as John Garziglia and Peter Tannenwald, and I'm very familiar with the CDBS and the ULS and the experimental licensing filing system, and I do have some comments concerning those systems as well. Dealing with the rather unique problems of the amateur service in licensing first, though, the one problem that we have that probably doesn't exist in any other radio service is privacy concerns about FRNs and Social Security numbers. The amateur licensing is all done on an individual basis. The licensees are all individuals. Even the trustees of club stations that are licensed are individuals. They are typically not familiar with FCC electronic processing of application forms, and in fact some applications filed in the amateur service have to be filed through volunteer examiner coordinators. And when a person comes to take an amateur radio exam, he or she takes that exam from a group of volunteer examiners that are coordinated by a handful of volunteer examiner coordinators, of which the ARRL is the largest. The problem that arises is that when a candidate for an examination comes to an exam session, he or she typically doesn't have an FRN number, and in order for the volunteer examiner coordinator to batch file the license data for the successful candidate's exam, there has to be an FRN applied for on the spot, and that's typically done out in the field by volunteers. And in the course of that activity, the Social Security number comes into the possession of the volunteer examiner team and the volunteer examiner coordinator. That's an uncomfortable situation for everybody involved, and I'm not sure that there's a good solution for it because of the otherwise rather efficient nature of amateur radio licensing. But the new CLS should, to the fullest extent possible, make obtaining through cores an FRN number as easy and convenient as possible for individuals who may not have daily interaction with the Commission's licensing processes. That way, if a candidate for an amateur radio exam comes to an exam session, they'll already have an FRN number. The other problem that the amateur service encounters from time to time is standardized forms. One size doesn't fit all in a lot of licensing contexts here. If a dismissal form is received, or a application return form, the same form is sent to an amateur radio operator who might just be upgrading the class of license that he or she has, as is sent to an applicant in the ULS for any other type of license. That form says, look, your application is in a dismissal status and you can't operate. You can't use your privileges. Well, that's just simply wrong, and it causes a lot of misinformation to be put into the hands of the amateur radio licensee. I was thinking, as we were talking earlier, some of the presenters were talking about the reason why they might be happier with one licensing system or another. That one reason why I am very comfortable with the CDBS is because it doesn't have a one application form fits all format. I'm certainly willing to agree that the forms in the CDBS are legacy forms, but they have specific purposes, and they're easy to negotiate through the form in the CDBS, although it would be helpful to have an offline mechanism for working on a draft form. But the benefit to me of the CDBS, the way it is right now, is that there's a specific form for a specific purpose. The Form 601 in the ULS is less comfortable for me because I have some very specific uses for it, typically on behalf of clients, and the form is not tailored for the specific purposes that I use. Case in point, an application for a remote pickup license in the broadcast auxiliary service. Many times, and I've heard broadcast engineers say this repeatedly, many times they'll get a return notice of a Part 74 RPU application done in the ULS because of vagaries in the channel center specifications that have to be made in that service, problems that don't exist for Part 90 applicants using the 601 form. So the reason I believe that the CDBS is a much more helpful system than the ULS is because of the availability of a particular form for a particular purpose. The 601 was prepared at a time when the applications were done on paper, and for Part 74 purposes, the predecessor for the 601 was a 313 form. It was a one-page form, very easy to use, and it was custom tailored for broadcast auxiliary applications. And again, you know, there was a lamentation generally about the loss of that form when the 601 came around initially. it would be helpful to have, at least in the context of a Part 74 application, for only those portions of the 601 to come up that would be useful, or at least some provision ought to be made for the unique channelization systems that exist under Part 74 that don't exist in Part 90. In terms of the availability of data, some systems work better than others. I think the ULS is excellent in terms of ascertaining license history, and as Peter and John have discussed, I think it's the CDBS isn't quite as good in that regard for the reasons that they stated. In terms of available information, though, Media Bureau processed special temporary authorizations are often lacking in information. That's not a problem in the experimental licensing system. It would be useful to have all files governing waivers and special temporary authorizations that are processed in the Media Bureau to have all of the background data available and all of the filings made in response to waiver requests and STAs in the Media Bureau publicly available. Finally, I'd like to echo the concerns about the experimental licensing system. It's cumbersome. It's not easy to use, especially where you have multiple sites that are being used. You have to enter frequency and emission data for each separate site, and it requires a completion of everything with respect to one site and then going through the entire process with a second site. It takes a very long time. The good part about that, of course, is, as already mentioned, the template format for those applications is very helpful. If you have an STA or an experimental license application that's similar to one that was previously filed, where you have different locations, though, the template format fails. With respect to passwords, going back to the CORS point for just a second, I spent a lot of time on the telephone with Commission staff because a client has forgotten the password for their FRN. It's so easy when you go to I see the card. It's so easy when you order something from a commercial establishment online and you forget the password that you used the last time that you ordered something from that company, to just enter your email address and whatever other verification information they want, and they'll email you your password, and you can continue on with what you're doing right then and there. The way I have to do it now with a client that's forgotten his or her or its FRN password, and it happens more often than you'd think, it'd be helpful to have that mechanism in process rather than having to call and go through a three-party telephone call to get the password reset and then have to reset it again. Those are very specific issues. Overall, on behalf of the amateur service, the electronic filing system, electronic licensing system, and the batch filing arrangements for the volunteer examiner coordinators have been very, very positive, and it's working extremely well. And like ComSearch, we hope that's preserved in the new CLS. Thanks.
A couple questions have come in, and we'll start with the data correction one. And the tower example came up earlier, where inevitably there's a tower. Maybe it moves, maybe it doesn't move, maybe the geopositioning has changed over time due to some sort of shifting. Oftentimes I'll go in and I'll see a tower, and I can draw a radius around that tower, and I'll find all sorts of licenses that are purportedly associated with that tower, but it looks more like a star or some sort of pentagon or something along those lines. So that comes the question is, if I, as the FCC, this is hypothetical, not that we do this, if I could go find a tower and say, everybody associated with this tower, I'm just going to automatically change your geopositioning information. Does that become offensive from a data correction standpoint? Is it better for a notice and response approach? Notice and response. So then along those lines, do you start associating timelines or anything as far as responding to that? So there's a lot of questions about data accuracy, and that's a theme that seems to be coming forward. I'm just not certain. There's a lot of things that I can do from an analysis standpoint and say this doesn't seem right. I think some of the proposals have been maybe throw that out up front, do the engineering tools up front, and so there's some true transparency as far as what's going on, and maybe not allowing that. But are there thoughts along those lines of at least the approach or the process with correcting the data or improving the data, if you will?
If the holder of an ASR changes the data, there ought to be notice to everybody who has that ASR in the database. And you can just say to them, we've gotten this notice of change. Do you want to change this on your license? Click yes or no. If you don't respond to it, then the next time you file an application, the system should say, you didn't answer when we asked you a question last time. Fix it now or you can't file a new application. People will fix it.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
So you've had in the Commission's instances many times where you've gone through these data corrections, changing out licensing systems. When they created the registration system for towers, we went through a 2-year process of state by state getting each tower up to date, and you went through that process with cellular when they went to a licensing system. You've done it 10 or 15 different times for different services and different examples, so you have a lot of sort of historical knowledge on how to go about it. The nice thing now is with the advent of the internet and the ability to sort of batch provide data. Back then we were doing a lot of paper files and had to have backups of 14, 15 inches of here's what I did with my file every time. Now, presumably, there should be some belief in the entity that when they provide you the data and they can upload it to you rather than actually do a data entry process, it should be a little bit more streamlined, hopefully, this time around.
But a little at Peter's point, do you apply the criteria to the application in question, or where the data may have changed and prevent any kind of further movement on there, or do you say, listen, that this entity that owns these 52 applications, the next time you come back to do business with me, do I force the changes along those lines?
I would put it in a pending application. I think the Media Bureau will do that to you now if they find any discrepancy with the ASR. What I think would be nifty would be a feature in the system that when you put in the ASR, a window opens and says, this tower is owned by so-and-so and this is a street address in ASR. Is this the tower you're talking about? Check yes or no. And that right away tells you whether you got a problem, because a lot of times there are towers in clusters and you actually do get the wrong one.
In ULS right now, when you are putting in a new facility on an existing tower that has an ASR registration and you click that, it pulls the data in from the ASR. I think that's a good approach to tie everything back to the ASR. But you also have to have some sort of limitation, somebody mentioned earlier, that where you don't have non-owners filing ASRs, because then you get multiple numbers for the same physical tower with different data. So if you can limit it to owners filing ASRs, because they're the only ones who have to file them under the rules, and then when somebody is applying to put a new site, new facility on that tower, limit them to the data that's provided by the ASR. In terms of data corrections, this has been a big issue whenever the Commission has converted to electronic filing systems, as Tom mentioned. And one of the problems, several of our clients still have difficulty or still are uncovering data errors in cellular license records that came into being because of the transition to ULS, or because of data that disappeared from the electronic databases after the transition to ULS occurred. And there really there isn't now a formal process in place for people who've discovered these historic errors to come back to the Commission and ask that those be corrected. And as a result, you discover an error in 2004 and you're unable to get it corrected, and then 5 years later it comes up again, and then you pull out your file and say, oh, this was never acted upon. So there needs to be a formal process beyond just the transitional window of doing a mass correction of the data. There needs to be some sort of process where licensees, having discovered a historic error in the record, can bring that to the attention of staff, and through a notification or an application that's either acted upon or denied.
I'd like to make a comment from the standpoint we've got to be careful about doing that too easily, because some certain changes would constitute major changes. And I know in the microwave realm, that is generally the criteria is whether or not there's an increased cost for interference. So, for example, if the site changes more than X seconds, it would have to be reanalyzed. And there's a host of things. In fact, the rules specify what constitutes a major or minor change. So I threw that out when I talked about it to say that we need to have some discussion about that. We're also running into that in white space, where we are looking to develop a white space database and dealing with the FCC or with the CORS data for the TV. So I think it's CLS data for TV, or whatever. Anyhow, so we're dealing with TV data. I'm losing acronym problems, but there is and the owners of that data would agree that there's varying levels of accuracy of that data. So. And how do you affect the changes without going through the 30-day public notice process? So there may be a handful of changes that can be made, fairly simply, but other changes would have to go back through some sort of a process to verify no interference.
I'm just going to chime in and say that broadcasters will have similar issues in that we're not a geographic area location, we're a spot-specific location. So modification of an ASR, while it may bring you up into the historically correct or into the correct location, it's going to create other regulatory problems for us. I think we can get past that, but we just got to be aware of it going in.
I'm just going to one more further comment on data corrections generally. I think the Commission needs to look at the data you are collecting. I know you want to be data driven, but there is a lot of data that's collected that doesn't really need to be collected by the Commission. It has no useful purpose to be collected, and the more data you're collecting, the more errors there's going to be in that data. And given the dynamic nature, I can tell you in the wireless industry, we have stuff changing on towers and on systems daily, in response to demand and capacity constraints. So if you're going to try and track that at the FCC, you're going to fail, is the easiest answer. So I think taking a look at what data you are collecting and see if there's things that you're collecting now that maybe you shouldn't be collecting would also be a useful step.
A little bit of a question about the forms. And specifically to Ms. Brayboy's comment about the large percentage of folks that doesn't have, or actually, I forget, somebody said they didn't have that access to the computers. I'm conning up there. So to the extent that we'll just say I can take a form, a one universal form, and make it an intelligent forming and do use case or purpose-driven questions along those lines on the computer. But it creates a problem when I look at the constituency that does not have access to a computer. So in that case, you could say that there may be a single authorization type of form, and on the computer we could tailor that as necessary for the service based upon what you're trying to do. But then when I address the non-computer-based constituents, I end up sending them a 500-page form with very detailed instructions. How do you address that point?
It's not a problem for our specific applications or purposes, I should say, on the intake side,
right,
because they have to go through a third-party frequency advisory committee, and we electronicize it, if that's a word, and ship it over. It's really just when you're sending communications back to the licensee. If you send them an email, they don't have an email address.
Right. Well, at the same point to Mr. Emily's question, about the amateurs who are lamenting the demise of some of the forms. I can understand the 601 being a challenge, and I don't know that it was designed intentionally for the amateur use case. But do you tailor the responses back to the community, or do you stick with a kind of a stock form, and the penalty may be that it's a long, confusing form?
Sorry, I perhaps was confusing. The 601 has nothing to do with amateur radio. There's a 605 form that the amateur service uses, and it's very specific to amateur radio purposes. The problem with the 601 is that it's designed essentially for most all of the wireless services other than the amateur service, and it's easier. It's easier using the CDBS, to my way of thinking, to have specifically tailored applications for specific purposes. I think that's what makes, to me, the CDBS easier to use. The historical concerns of broadcasters and broadcast engineers with with the Form 601, I think just goes back to the additional complexity that any multiple purpose form is going to have over the predecessor form, which was very simple and fell into the same category as those you find in the CDBS.
I represent a lot of very small people, and I haven't found anybody who doesn't have access to a computer in the last couple of years, so I was very interested in Connie's comment about that. I don't know how much of that there is, but I would note that in situations where the Commission has to interface with a lot of unsophisticated licensees, it has interposed a mandatory third party like PCIA or the volunteer coordinator. And if that's the case, then the Commission doesn't have to really accommodate the non-computer user other than maybe in giving notices, as Connie mentioned. So I'm not sure how big a problem it is. It's sort of new to me. And
I don't think it is merits a solution other than, literally print out their letter and stick it in the mail. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
I'd like to be a little more direct about this. I think in the year 2010, to have an agency deal with the public on the assumption there's going to be those that do not have computer access would be almost akin to an agency dealing with a member of the public and assuming that they don't have a mailing address. While there are people that do not have mailing addresses, I think we can all agree, and I think your point is well taken, Connie, that there would be third-party providers who would be available should there be an individual or an entity that does not have computer access.
And before we move on, another common theme I'm hearing is pre-filling data. And I've heard the previous used application or item, I've heard some sort of default requirements, and I'm not quite sure how to frame that. Is this a separate world that you go in and you say, this is the data I want to constantly pre-fill and fill it out, or do I always just go back and look to the most recent updated information? I mean, there's different approaches towards that.
The approach I would like to see is using CORS or whatever the successor to CORS is in a CLS universe, containing the information that you would need to pre-fill the applicant and contact information data. And you can have different CORS registrations referencing the same company for different purposes. One person in the company might need to have a FRN and password for filing universal service reports or other online reports. And then you might have the licensing folks who would have a separate FRN referencing the same underlying tax ID number for licensing purposes. And it would be helpful if you could just pull it in from the CORS record, because the way ULS is set up now, if you're filling out a 601, you can pre-fill only if a 601 was previously filed. Or if you're doing a 603, it'll only pre-fill if you're pulling up a previous 603. And that's just a starting point. That's a convenience. Once it's pre-filled, you should be able to change it. So if the address is changed, or the zip code is changed, or the phone number or something.
I just want to echo that. I mean, there does need to be some flexibility because while CORS is a great starting point, in a large corporation, they may have lots of different addresses for the different licenses, so there should be more of a pull-down for certain things as opposed to a pre-fill. So, I mean, there's going to have to be some intelligence applied to the pre-fill. Right. You just can't say everything is going to be the same for each of these fields. Unfortunately, it would be nice if we could just say this is the one way to do it, but I don't think that's realistic, and I echo what Brian said, that you have to have the ability in those unusual circumstances where the pre-fill comes in. We've had cases where the pre-fill came in and you can't change it. So you're stuck calling the FCC to say, look, this isn't right. You're pre-filling it and I can't get in there to change it. What do I do? So
we provide our clients with the opportunity, either they come in and they fill out a user profile, which is sort of the CLS manager concept. And we also invite them to create templates. And because a number of our direct clients have licensees as their clients, and so they're filling out applications for a variety of different clients and different license types. So we invite them to develop templates, and then they just pick the template that they want to use for that particular application.
So I think we'll go ahead and say this.
Just a comment about Media Bureau CDBS and pre-filling. They do an excellent job of pre-filling amendments to pending applications, where the technical data is carried forward to the amendment and all the prior attachments are carried forward. And I'd like to underscore that that's an excellent practice, and we like that. We have to be careful, though, because once that application is granted and then you want to modify the resulting construction permit, in some instances we're finding that if you go to modify that CP, not only is the data being carried forward again, but also the original attachments are being carried forward, and that's undesired. So as we talk about pre-filling, let's be careful about whether or not the attachments are carried forward.
I think we'll continue with Ms. Vasek.
Good morning. I'm Donald Vasic. I'm UTC's Director of Spectrum Services. UTC, the Utilities Telecom Council, serves not only as an advocate for the telecommunications needs of the critical infrastructure industry, but also as one of the FCC's Part 90 certified frequency coordinators for the private land mobile services. So the creation of the CLS is certainly going to have an impact on a number of areas that touch across all of our various interests. So I'm going to briefly address some of the questions that the Commission posed in their list. Some of them have been addressed already. I'll skip a couple. I'll reinforce a couple others. First of all, in regards to the electronic filing and correspondence issues, UTC's experience is pretty much the same as PCIA's, as well as my personal experience with previous coordinating agencies that I've worked with. Electronic filing and correspondence should, in fact, be the accepted standard that the FCC uses. At the same time, we share the experience that not quite everybody gets it. As Connie mentioned, it's a generational thing. In some areas, you have small family-run businesses. The other issue when you get into remote or rural locations is that not everybody has broadband yet, and not everybody wants to be filing applications on a dial-up system. So I think one of the suggestions the FCC made was some kind of opt-out procedure from mandatory electronic filing. Have the applicant or licensee specifically tell you that they want to deal with paper rather than electronically. UTC also agrees that an electronic version of the authorization should be deemed an official authorization. Posting of a paper license has not been required, at least in the Part 90 services, for some time now. And our periodic contacts with FCC's Enforcement Bureau personnel around the country has indicated that that really hasn't created any problems. If there are any hard copy posting rules that need to be relaxed in other services, they could be looked at. And the CLS should be considered the system of record the way many consider the ULS to be today. UTC's membership includes many large companies that use a variety of telecommunications applications throughout different departments within their company. These different departments handle different functions, and sometimes they don't have a lot of need to interact. Because of this kind of internal structure, UTC supports an option that would allow for a company to have not only a master FRN, but also additional subsidiary FRNs that could be department-specific, yet remain associated and linked with the master FRN. This could also help with some of the registration problems that arise that people have noted when employees change, for instance. If you've got a couple of different ones, a different FRN for each department, you won't run into that situation as much where one person leaves. Regarding the commonality of terminology and procedural rules amongst different services, UTC agrees that the Commission will need to conduct a review to ensure that there is a consistency from rule part to rule part. A moment ago I mentioned something about posting licenses. Right now, the rules governing posting of licenses are different in Part 87 and Part 90 and Part 101. Maybe they need to be, maybe they don't, but they should be looked at since, a lot of the actual operations that are being licensed across those parts are the same. Likewise, there are differences in the rules dealing with operator requirements and unauthorized operation found in Parts 90 and Parts 101. Another unusual example. This was pointed out by one of our members. Part 87.171, the station class code for aeronautical multicom stations, is completely different from the station class code that's actually listed in Schedule G of the Form 601. Talk about getting into the weeds, but that's the kind of thing that applications can be rejected for. So there may be some other examples of that merit review. The Commission has asked about the need for conformity in application processing procedures across radio services. Somewhat related to this might be the handling of applications for temporary authorizations. STAs are routinely granted for 6 months. We understand that in the microwave services, some temporary earth stations operate for periods less than that, and while they could turn in the STA sooner than that, there's really no mechanism for doing that. Now, for instance, with a regular license, you can go on the ULS and cancel your license at any time. Perhaps something like that might be looked at in the CLS for STAs as well, rather than letting an STA naturally expire, and might unencumber some frequencies earlier that way. As the FCC moves forward with designing and implementing the CLS, UTC urges the Commission to carefully consider any changes to the data collection requirements that will be imposed on applicants and licensees, as well as the amount and nature of data that is made available to the public. Critical infrastructure licensees, such as gas and water companies, are dependent on secure and reliable communications to conduct routine business and emergency response on a daily basis. There's already much information available today via the ULS that gives pause to many in the critical infrastructure community. The collection and public availability of additional information that would make it easier to identify key physical or cyber assets or provide greater specificity on the traffic carried and functional purpose of a given frequency or network could have potentially disastrous results. Disclosure of such critical information would make it easier for would-be attackers to carry out their plans. While we appreciate the value of greater transparency that the public expects when dealing with a natural resource such as spectrum, we also believe there are limits to the value of that transparency when it unintentionally creates a greater risk of compromising the mission-critical communications necessary to deliver utility service to the public. So we strongly urge the Commission not to adopt any new data collection or posting requirements in the CLS that could potentially jeopardize critical infrastructure telecommunications. Lastly, before the ULS was rolled out, the FCC conducted a beta test for nearly a year to give the public and the frequency coordinators an opportunity to review and comment. As our members always tell us, the ULS is not just for coordinators, and we don't expect that the CLS will be either. And coordinators don't use the ULS in the same way as private licensees do. So back with the ULS, the Commission extended an invitation to a number of large corporate licensees to participate in the beta testing, and we encourage the Commission to do that again for the CLS. Certainly some of UTC's members that participated last time would be happy to participate again. Thank you.
Thanks. Being at a trade association and going this late in the panel is that I can significantly narrow the comments I was going to make, as my members and their counsel have already made a lot of the comments I would have made on this roundtable. So I'm going to stick with focusing not on the filing side so much as the receiving information out of the database side of this discussion. And I know I had chimed in on this earlier, but I would echo the ability to have access to APIs in order to manipulate data. I think all of us agree that manipulation of the data that's already in the record, and I would agree with my colleague at UTC that we certainly would not support additional filings and putting additional potentially security risk information into the licensing systems for public consumption. But the ability to manipulate that data to produce results and reports that are useful in any number of ongoing FCC proceedings is of critical importance to us. But also noting that almost everyone on this panel is an engineer or a lawyer, I think we also need to bear in mind that while I would wholly support the idea of having searchable databases where you can search every field. I know my experiences with ULS, and while you can search by state or you can search by channel block, which is more important than frequency for a lot of what we do at CTIA, you can't search by channel block by state. So the ability to kind of daisy chain those search results and get the data that you want in as short a period of time is really important to us. Like I said, block versus frequency. Many of us at the table understand when you talk about PCSC that you're talking about 1895 to 1910. I don't think most of the public has any idea what we're talking about when we do that, and certainly a lot of us that are in places where we're not working all the time with engineers and lawyers would appreciate the ability to make that easier for our associates in order to return the data that we're looking for. I would also echo what has been said so far about the history of partition and disaggregation data for ULS licenses. I think that is done fairly well now, but there's obviously improvements that can be made in order to make it easier to parse through. That can be somewhat of a chore. It's all there. It's just a little bit of a chore to get to that information. I had mentioned APIs earlier, and Andrew kind of chimed in and said, so let the market resolve it. I don't disagree with that. I would definitely see a role for the tools on the website for the FCC, and I think Spectrum Dashboard is a great start to seeing how the FCC's public portal can really leverage the data that is on the databases and return results that are important both to practitioners in our field but also to those who may not have the detailed technical information that we do. And I know the folks will be back here in a week to discuss improvements to Dashboard, so I can save those for next week.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin.
Hi, my name is Joan Griffin. I'm an attorney at Kelly Dry. I have practiced telecommunications law for a number of years now, either as in-house counsel or as an attorney at Kelly Dry. Most of my clients are either doing satellite work, earth stations, satellites, and the like, or they're involved in the international arena. That gets me into IBFS a great deal. I also do a lot of transaction work. I work a lot with companies that are either being sold or purchased, companies that are licensees, and that gets me into a variety of databases, either in the process of doing due diligence work, looking at people's licenses and the like, or actually filing transfer of control applications. A lot of the comments that I came here with today have been stated already, but there are a number of things I would like to echo, including the things that I think that Peter has mentioned before, and that I think Peter is probably going to say in his remarks. First of all, I am all for electronic filing. I noted Mark's comment about the lack of a database for the Wireline Competition Bureau with interest. It is not uncommon for me to have a client being sold that holds a domestic Section 214 authorization, an international Section 214 authorization, and wireless licenses, meaning that I will have in effect 3 applications, one before that has to be filed through ULS, one that has to be filed through IBFS, and one that has to be put on paper and shipped to St. Louis. That is a tremendous administrative nightmare that greatly increased costs both for me and for my client. So I am all for electronic filing. I realize there are undoubtedly individuals out there who who don't have access to the internet or what have you. Obviously, the Commission needs to come up with ways for those individuals to make their filings, but the default definitely, I think, should be that all filing is done electronically. Second, you had asked earlier about whether the Consolidated Licensing System should be expanded to basically cover documents and the like that are not licensing related. I am all for getting all of the Commission's documents the Commission receives that are public documents available online. It is a frustration for me, and I'm sure for the other attorneys here, when we get involved in proceedings and documents are not available online. The example that comes to mind for me are OTARD petitions. OTARD petitions, the Commission will put out a public notice. An OTARD petition has been received. Comments are welcome, but I have to go get someone to go over to the Commission to actually pick up the document, or I have to try to sweet talk the attorney who is responsible for the petition to sending me copies of the comments. That's a hassle for me. It's more expensive. It's a hassle for staff. At the same time, my feeling with respect to the Consolidated Licensing System is that's a lot right now that the Commission is trying to chew on. I would not suggest trying to expand that system to cover non-licensing documents. I agree completely with what John had said earlier. ECFS should be a default repository for documents, things like OTARD petitions, documents that don't otherwise have a home ought to go into ECFS. I also agree, it's a simple matter. Scan documents, scan licenses as they're issued, stick them into ECFS. Stick them somewhere where people can get them. There's a historical record. That saves, I think, industry a lot of time and hassle, and it saves the Commission a lot of time and hassle as well. Third, I found with interest Connie's comments about having customers that require paper copies. Certainly the FCC should have a mechanism whereby individuals who don't have access to getting documents, to getting input back from the Commission online, to get those documents on paper. But I think the default mode should be that if you filed electronically, you should get your response back from the Commission electronically. Like Allison, I have received documents from the Commission, typically for STAs, days before those STAs are to expire. Obviously, had I not gone online, gotten the document out of IBFS or what have you, my client would have been up the creek without a paddle, if I had tried to rely on the paper document. I note that with doing international work, I have the pleasure and the privilege of dealing with Team Telecom, which means that I have done a lot of work with DHS. DHS, following the anthrax scare, announced to everyone who has an NSA, a mitigation agreement with them, that they would no longer accept paper copies at all of anything. They want everything electronically. It makes life, frankly, a lot easier, in dealing with them. Therefore, it would be much easier to, if the FCC similarly, everything that goes in, everything comes out, goes electronically. One problem that I don't know that I've heard anyone mention that I have had, quirky little problem, is that the forms that are available through the forms link on the website don't always match what's in IBFS. The Form 312, the numbers are different. If you're working with a new client, a new satellite or Earth Station applicant who doesn't understand what the FCC is about to start off with and doesn't understand what Earth Station licenses are about, having these forms different can generate confusion. So going forward, if we can make the forms that are available for people to look at in paper match the forms that are actually in the databases, that would be very, very useful. Finally, I want to end on a note of caution. It is great that the Commission wants to make its databases more easily accessible to the public. And I've always found, having dealt not only with the FCC but with state licensing agencies and foreign licensing agencies, I think and also as well as other federal agencies, the FCC is to be commended for the amount of information that's available online and the extent to which the FCC tries to make itself and its services and its website accessible to the public. Simple things such as the availability of an online phone book is tremendous. It can be very difficult to reach individuals and other government agencies, federal government agencies, because you don't have phone numbers. You don't know who they are. It's always been very easy to get a hold of FCC staff and to get information out of the different databases. There's no question but that the databases are quirky. It's a quirky business, but they work. And I echo what Peter said earlier. I'm no technological genius. I can get into these databases. I can learn how to work them. If it's not broke, please don't fix it. I have a lot of concerns that moving to a consolidated database is going to result in a lot of pain, a lot of loss of data, and a long period of agony while we try to learn a new system. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, that's been mentioned, is in moving to this consolidated database, use of uniform terms. I can't say no to that loudly enough. It strikes me as the tail wagging the dog. The fact remains that we have different services. There are different rules applicable to different services. Those rules were developed by different bureaus, all of whom have their own philosophies and beliefs. The rules are different. Great if you can get the commission to move to a consolidated set of rules where cancellation means one thing for one service as well as it does for another. But that's not where we're at now. I have serious concerns that if you try to move to a consolidated set of terminology, you are going to be changing substantive rights and obligations of parties. You're going to be opening up a Pandora's box that you would not otherwise be opening up. My final point is on FRNs. I very much appreciated the comment that I believe Donald or Christopher made earlier of the nightmare of clients that do not remember passwords and the phenomenal problems of trying to get passwords out of the FCC. If the FCC is not going to move to an Amazon.com type, gee, you lost your password, send an email here and we'll get the password out to you type of system, I would very much object to any attempt in the context of creating a consolidated licensing system to fooling with FRNs. That, as far as I'm concerned, ought to be a completely separate proceeding, because the fact remains that FRNs are the gating item for getting into any of these databases. And doing a change that somehow makes it more complicated or more difficult for people to access their licensing is going to wreak a much greater level of havoc, I believe, in the community than moving to a consolidated licensing system. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Well, am I the only one who doesn't have a lot of trouble with FRN passwords? The personal security question has solved the problem of resetting a password online, so it's only the old ones that are a problem, and for that it does take a certain amount of time, but the problem is you can't do it instantly, not that you can't do it. But I think that is a separate issue. Most of what I wanted to say has been said, but I think that the Commission, when they design this system, has to remember that they're probably working with at least two constituencies, if not more. There are the professionals in this room who need batch filing and APIs and all those kinds of things, and then there's a little guy out there, the small licensee, who would like not to have to pay any of us to do this job for them and ought to be able to do at least the simpler filings on their own. And that means having software that doesn't require a brand new or sophisticated computer or a lot of add-ons. That's my biggest problem with ULS, is this Java stuff that you have to keep updating all the time to get it to work. And I can do CDBS on my BlackBerry. Okay, so I think you need to have a way, even if it takes longer, even if it's more difficult, you need to have a way for a small licensee to be able to try to deal with the system. That also speaks a little bit against the one form fits all. We've all beat up on the 601 enough, and when I do something as simple as a notification of completion of construction, which is very easy in ULS because you just answer a couple of questions, and then I print the 601 and send it to a client, the first thing I say is don't read it because you won't understand it. Look at question 42, and that's all that counts. So I'm with all the people who feel like Chris, who feel that you may have an opening screen that comes out of cores, but after that you really need to be able to go off into the specialized form that you need. Having an opening screen from cores is not a bad idea. Right now, broadcasters have to have a separate CDBS account and remember that number and password, and that doesn't seem to be very useful or serve an independent purpose. But remember also that if you use the FRN as the universal gateway, you have to remember the purpose of the FRN and the needs of the people who use it. The people who use it, you've heard a lot of people say today, you have to be able to have sub-accounts because of security issues within companies or different divisions within companies. But the basic purpose of FRN is to know if it's the same entity. And so if you have multiple numbers and somebody has a common name of their company or whatever, you've sort of broken the purpose of it. That suggests that you're going to need an FRN system that has a master number with subsidiary accounts or something like that so that you can pin down who it is. The ownership report is the classic example, the broadcast ownership report, where we've been threatened that if one owner of a broadcast station doesn't have the same FRN for every station they own, it's going to break up this ownership database and we're all going to go to jail for it. It's pretty complicated. So that's my first point, is that you have to be able to deal with all the different kinds of people. I also have not found, as Tom has, that you need pockets of expertise to use the different systems. Not only have I used them all myself, but I have one legal assistant who can use all of them. Where we need the pockets of expertise is in the substantive regulations that apply to the applications in each system, and we do within the law firm have people with different expertise, and that I think is inevitable and is beyond the scope. Fixing that is beyond the scope of what we're doing here, which is just an application filing system. In terms of being able to retrieve information from databases, I do think that's important. Again, I use CDBS a lot, and I can get almost anything out of it by using the percentage sign wildcard. And if I want to know everybody who's filed an application for a digital low-power TV station in March of 2010, I can put in DTL and 2010 percentage mark, and bingo, they're all going to come up. And I can confine it by state. I can do a lot of things. ULS, much harder to find that. And everybody's saying they can find whatever they want from ULS. The more data fields you can search on, the better. How important it is for the Commission to facilitate all kinds of searches is an interesting question, probably also beyond the scope of this discussion here. Notifications of actions would be very useful, but keep in mind that there are private services that do that. When the Commission put a word search on its homepage, it drove one company out of business that provided that service. And so that's fine. The government can provide a free service when it wants to, but in terms of the cost of government resources, a decision needs to be made as to how important it is for a service to be provided for free, or whether it's okay if people who need that service have to pay a little bit for it, in which case a private entrepreneur will probably find it for you. I think everything else I wanted to say has pretty well been covered in one place or another, so we'd be better off to go back to roundtable discussion.
Thank you. So I've got a couple more lingering questions here. Probably one of the issues is the privacy concerns, and not so much. There are a lot of dynamics associated with privacy, be it the Social Security numbers, be it in more of the national security setting venue. But instead of getting into the specific items that may have privacy concerns, what does it take to demonstrate that the system provides sufficient protections on the privacy standpoint? What are the strategies? What are the approaches? How does one communicate that to the user community and say, it's secure, and it's secure for these reasons? Are there thoughts that people have along those lines? I know it's kind of an esoteric question.
I would say this, that at the minimum the Commission should require of itself no less than what it requires for the CP&I rules.
Okay. That's a good model. Last but not least, rollout, and specifically, this is more the outreach, the communication plan associated with this. So we've heard lots of ideas, I've heard year-long beta testing from a historical standpoint, user groups from large to small sizes. Inevitably, there's going to be a lot of moving components to this, and when you're talking about millions of licensees at this stage in the game, so any kind of change has to be communicated across this footprint of individuals. So, some of the strategies, are there any specific recommendations on how we go about getting the communication plan out to the public or out to the folks that care? I won't say specifically what the strategies should be, but better yet, how do we get the discussion going on the outreach? Do I put a wiki out there, a blog? I mean, how do people want to engage on this piece?
I think you've already started doing it, to be honest. I mean, you had a session at the Wireless Association meeting. You had one at the Broadcast Association meeting. You have to kind of go to where the people are. You have to go to ARRL and meet with them. You have to go to UTC and meet with them. You have to go to PCIA and meet with them. You have to go to where the people are. You can't expect them to come to the web and find out about this stuff or expect that they will pay attention, to be honest. And when we rolled out ULS, I will say that we did it service by service. So you had the ship and maritime guys came on, and they had a period of time of communication and testing before you went to the next service. So a carefully communicated plan that's, I won't call it slow, but call it a steady progress rather than today 35 different services are now going to be in CLS, and you guys tell us what the problems are. It won't work real well. But you have the commission's booth, you've had the outreach that's been going out to different conferences, and I think that's the right approach, is to continue to have that sort of conversation with folks to let them know, and then let them know when this will affect their day-to-day lives.
Peter?
If I could shift for 1 second, we have not talked about national emergency cases at all. Obviously, that is when everything falls apart. We've talked about best cases, normal work, and so on. Right. I believe the FCC really needs to keep open the ability to accept paper forms, accept phone support, something in case we get a bad event. And we don't know what that bad event will ever look like, and it will probably be effectively random. We don't know if phones will work. We don't know if cell phones will work. Will the internet survive in a particular area? Will it go down? And we need to be able to handle and coordinate those licensing efforts during the case of a national emergency.
Peter, in his closing comments, raised something that I thought was that hadn't been raised here. Hadn't been raised, and I think is important. We've spent 99% of our time here today talking about the input of data and the data once in the form. And Peter raised, well, what does the form look like when we send it to the client? And I think that is something that should be focused in on. Most of the FCC electronic forms now in CDBS and in ULS, and I think across the board, I believe perhaps the antenna structure registration form is the nicest looking as far as when it goes out to the client. But many of the other forms, for someone that doesn't look at FCC forms every day, they are next to unintelligible. I don't think it reflects well on the agency itself to have forms like that going out that are agency produced, and it certainly doesn't help the attorney or the engineer or whoever's helping the client along in doing forms to send a form that with ULS might be multiple pages, with CDBS may have questions split across pages, and this is just the way it works now. Since we're looking at the system as a whole, look at the back end also. When the print button is hit so that you're sending something to a client, whether it be in PDF or whether it be on paper, does the form immediately look attractive and intelligible and is something that the layperson could understand as a final form?
There's a practice within media of a present authorization will refer to a prior authorization or a prior permit for technical and operational details that impact the present operation of that license. I think that's a practice that needs to be halted as we move forward through this process, that the authorization that you get from the Commission is your authorization, that there's no requirement to maintain a 40-year-old document in some cases of hours of operation. And we have an opportunity now to do this, and I think that should be one of our design goals.
Some of the difficulty with the appearance of forms is a function of your browser. Internet Explorer is the only browser that's universally compatible with all the Commission systems. I use Firefox, and there are issues in almost all the systems. Very few. They've gotten better and better. But when you do roll out this system, I think you have to think about what's being used. At least Explorer and Firefox and probably Google Chrome, because a lot of people are picking up on that now. I don't know about the Mac people because I'm not a Mac person, but that's going to be an important thing. In CDBS, Explorer was first, and the wrinkles got worked out with Firefox later, and that caused a lot of problems until I figured out why there was a problem.
Well, I think that just about does it. I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's we've a few minutes to spare, but I think we had a good conversation. Again, this is the beginning of the discussion. I would stay tuned for more parsed out discussions on specific functionality. I can see search as being one of those discussions right off the top of my head, along with APIs perhaps. But thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the day.